Hello, strangers, and some of you are my friends. Hello, people that live in my computer. I am now in your computer, or maybe on your phone, or wherever it is that you're watching this. This is Mark's Notcast. Again, another episode. Will he ever stop? Who knows? This one is number 197. I think I'm going to have to stop keeping count when I get to about 1,244. Assuming I ever make it that far. Should take me about 20 years, I think. And today it is the 4th of May 2022, and I'm talking about an album that was released 43 years ago this month. David Bowie's 13th studio album, Lodger, a very underrated record in his career indeed. It's the shortest David Bowie studio album of original material. He has one shorter studio album, Pin-Ups, but Pin-Ups is made out entirely of cover versions, which I don't like cover version albums. Very few of them are any good. I also think Pin-Ups is the worst David Bowie record. Yes, worse than Tin Machine 2. And Lodger, coming in at just 34 minutes, 38 seconds, is the shortest studio album of new original material recorded and released by David Bowie. Unless there is another one, which we don't quite know about. There are, at the moment, something like 14 posthumous live albums that have been released following his death, and only one studio record, Toy, which has been previously unreleased, which has now escaped into the big bad world. That's longer as well. So Lodger was released May 1979. And it was recorded in September 1978 and in March 1979. And it was, although it's regarded as the last of the Berlin-Trilogy, none of it was recorded in Berlin. And Brian Eno, who's regarded by many people as being perhaps the architect with David of the Berlin-Trilogy, only appears on 6 of the album's 10 tracks. So to call it the third album in the Berlin-Trilogy isn't strictly true. I think of Station to Station, Low, Heroes, Lodger, and Scary Monsters all being released in more or less 4 years as part of a piece of work, in the same way that the albums, Ziggy Stardust, Hunky Dory, Man Who Sold the World, Aladdin Sane, those albums are kind of a muchness as well. So I don't think of that album or Bowie's albums as being made in trilogies. I think of them being made in lumps of 5 or 6 before he substantially changed his direction. But you could see with each album that went through is that there was an evolution and a movement to something new, apart from obviously Tin Machine 2, which was a kind of a retrograde step, really. For this album, Lodger, I think the first thing that I'll say is to me, you can really hear the influence of bands that have been influenced by David Bowie on this for the first time in David's career. So you can hear the influence of Talking Heads, David Byrne, Adrian Belew, who I think also played with Talking Heads live on this record. And obviously, there's that great line about, a thief is somebody who steals from others, and now he's stealing from the thieves. Maybe not quite quoting U2 there in Lodger, but you can hear the influences of the acts that had been influenced by him for the first time on Lodger. Now, taken in isolation, completely outside of everything else, not paying the slightest bit of attention to what was happening in the world any other time in history, Lodger is in my opinion an album that stands up really, really well. Although it's an album that didn't have much in the way of commercial success, didn't have much in the way of hits. David didn't tour it, so it's overlooked, I think, in his discography. And if you're sat there going, I want to listen to a fantastic David Bowie LP that I haven't really heard enough, or I don't really know, Lodger is a great place to start. It opens with the beautiful song, Fantastic Voyage, and at least half of it is fabulous. Half of it, not so fabulous. But still pretty darn good. And whereas for example, albums like Low and Heroes were half moody instrumental sound pieces, which were heavily influenced people like Trent Reznor's soundtrack albums and Nine Inch Nails' Ghosts albums. for this album, rather than have half of it being vocal and half of it being instrumental. The other half was the album was 4 vocals, 10 songs, David Bowie singing his heart out, some of it influenced by perhaps a very unusual series of events, his Turkish neighbours in Berlin, for example, and a trip that he made to Kenya in 1978, and the sounds that he heard while he was on those events and those trips, hugely influential on this album, whereas perhaps other albums not so much. But Lodger is, very good. Now, talk through the album bit by bit. It was recorded. The music for the album was recorded in September 1978, in a break on David's 1978 world tour, and I think that was recorded mostly in Montreux, probably the same studio that Queen later used for some of their recordings, and maybe even Phil Collins, and who knows, maybe even that awful album Tonight. And in that period, David's live band built up 10 instrumental tracks with no vocals, no melodies, nothing like that on there. And sometimes they changed the instruments around. So, for example, I think with Boys Keep Swinging, the instruction that was given was that Dennis Davis would play bass instead of drums, and Carlos Alomar might play drums instead of guitar, and so on and so forth. Although I heard that Tony Visconti overdubbed the bass on Boys Keep Swinging later on. And the idea being is that with that, you would have musicians that were playing outside of their comfort zone, but also, if you don't know the rules of an instrument, you don't know the established conventions, you've got nothing to unlearn. So it sounds very different. For example, R.E.M's Hair Shirt, which is the 11th track on the Green album, Peter Buck plays drums. Peter Buck is not a drummer, and so therefore the time signatures that he's playing on Hair Shirt are the time signatures that a drummer would listen to and go, that is totally wrong, and that doesn't make any sense, and I can't play it, which might explain why R.E.M. never played it live, because Bill Berry and then later Joe Waronker and Bill Riflin couldn't play it because they were too good at drums to play it. And so, for example, the instruments that you've got on Boys Keep Swinging, although you may not necessarily think so, there's something about it that sounds a little bit wrong and a little bit weird, and that's because it's being played by musicians, but they're not playing their standard lead instrument, the ones that they're best known for. Which I think is quite a brave little move, and it makes the song sound a little bit different and a little bit strange. And if Lodger is anything, the whole theme of Lodger, and it's even in the title here, is that it's about somebody that's living and existing in a state where they don't necessarily belong, or where they don't feel comfortable, or where they don't feel at home, which is a theme that runs all through side 1 of the album, starting with Fantastic Voyage and ending on Red Sails. And then side 2 is all the lyrics on side 2 are around not necessarily fitting into the society in which you exist, whereas side 1 is all about travel and movement and exploration and moving to new places. Heck, it's even got a song called Move On it, which seems to be a pretty clear statement of intent there. And then the second part of the album, the vocals, were recorded in March 1979 in New York. And much like the way in which I think Morrissey used to record, is that the instrumentals were finished and then the vocals were added. And sometimes the musicians that played the instrumentals didn't know anything about where the song was going to go, what the vocal line was going to be, until they heard the finished mix. And how David liked to put himself under pressure, work quite quickly, maybe record vocals 2 or 3 takes, sometimes make up lyrics when he's on the mic. And that allowed a degree of spontaneity, but what it also did is it allowed the imagination to operate outside of the standard and conventional structures which you would expect it. So, for example, I think one of Morrissey's bands said this as well, is that when you were recording, you thought the chorus would be here and the verse would be there, but when you heard the finished version of the song, for example, because the person that was making the decisions wasn't necessarily a conventional musician in many respects, what you'd find is that the verse would be 8 lines or 7 lines, and then it might be 3 lines or maybe 6, and then you find that the chorus may happen once or twice, or it repeats. So the structures are really strange, and if you try to analyse them and think about them in the way that a session musician might listen to them, and you might go, this song doesn't work, that verse is 9 lines, that one is 6, there's a chorus there, and then the chorus is repeated twice, but the second time, and then the head explodes or something. And this is a trick which you can hear in both Fantastic Voyage and Boys Keep Swinging. because it's two verses, then two choruses, and the second chorus is different. At least that's what the books I've read tell me, and what I experienced when I listened to the songs earlier on today. Well, you listen to them and you go, I don't quite know where these vocals are going to go. And I have maybe it's an affliction. I'm able to listen to new songs and I'm able to memorize them like that. The first time I hear a song, I've pretty much memorized it, apart from maybe some of the nuance in the lyrics. By the third time, I already know the song inside out. But whereas these songs, it's very difficult to memorize them because they don't work in the way in which you think conventional song structures do, which is an intro, a verse, chorus, maybe a verse, maybe a chorus, then a bridge, then probably an outro chorus or something. Maybe throw in a guitar solo if you're a fret metal wanker. And by the way, I am a fret metal wanker. I bought the complete works of Judas Priest at the weekend, a 20 CD box set. I'm from Birmingham, and I grew up in Birmingham in the 80s, and it was the law that you had to like metal. That I didn't make the rules. That's just the rules. So there you go. So the album opens with Fantastic Voyage. I think Fantastic Voyage was the last song that Bowie sung on stage, not as a duet, in 2006. He did a show in New York, and there's one person recorded it on their mobile phone, and I think it was just him and Mike Garson performing the song. And it's a beautiful song. It's an incredible song to end your career on, actually, as well. Fantastic Voyage. It's just got this gorgeous little lyric about in the unlikely event of this fantastic voyage coming to an end, and it kind of revisits the theory, a sense of coming to the end of your life and coming at peace with the things that you have had around them. And for someone who's so young, well, relatively young, to write songs that were so old is quite surprising. Bowie was in his 30s when he wrote Fantastic Voyage, and the idea of being in that environment and thinking very, very clearly that you had a sense of, my time is running out, when you're that young. Salman Rushdie has a theory about premature death awareness, which is great artists are driven by the knowledge that they are mortal. You think about some of the greatest artists of all time, they're one of their key parental or mother, father figures died at a very young age, and then that spurred them on to create art, to make a difference, to leave a mark, to say, I was here. And that's something which you've got in Fantastic Voyage as well. And it's a song that is, I think, to some respects, it's about an apocalypse. It's about living under the shadow of imminent death. Now, this is a theme which was very, very prevalent in the 80s. So, David was a seer, seeing into the future, and a prophet in some respects. In so much as, I remember growing up in 1979 when this album came out, and I was about 5 or 6 years old. The thing that I was really, really aware of is that at any moment the air raid sirens could go off and we could all be vaporized in a nuclear apocalypse. That was a thought that crossed my mind every single day. And it's only when it stopped happening, it's like the absence of being ill. You don't notice it stopped happening until you're far past it, and you suddenly realize, I don't feel that sudden sense of terror that the air raid sirens could go off and the world could explode and everything could be vaporized. Obviously, in the current political environment, with the war that's happening in Ukraine and the aggression of perhaps some of the armies that are taking place in that, is I now feel that we are probably closer on the doomsday clock than we have been for a very long time, and I feel less confident and positive about the future of mankind than I have done for a long period of time. So thanks. Nobody had World War on the 2022 bingo card, but luckily David Bowie saw the future coming and he predicted it in his song. So Fantastic Voyage is, I think, one of his very, very best songs, actually. There's a gorgeous cover version of it by Nine Inch Nails, which is on YouTube. And it's about, I think, living in the shadow of the bomb. It's about living under the risk of apocalypse. It's around living with the knowledge that everything could be destroyed at the drop of a hat. And it's around that idea that we may never get old, which is an image which David returned to in 2003's Reality album with the song never get old. But also, it's something which became, a key part of culture that I lived in. In 1984, we had this truly horrific film, Threads, which is, I think, one of the grimmest and most depressing things that I have ever seen. And so, of course, I had to go and buy it on Blu-ray. But there's also films like Failsafe and other ones about living in the age of nuclear destruction. 1983 saw Pink Floyd's The Final Cut, an album about exactly the same thing. It saw the 1986 film When the Wind Blows. David Bowie wrote the song When the Wind Blows for that, which is about watching a couple die of radiation poisoning following a nuclear apocalypse. These were not easy times to be alive. In the 80s, is to be living with that knowledge that at any given moment our entire way of life could be destroyed in 4 minutes, and the only notice that you get would be a siren that you'd never heard before that would be going off like the horns of Jericho, calling the impending apocalypse. And of course, that's how the lovely cheery album, the 13th studio album, fantastic, Voyage, is the opening song on it. That's how the 13th studio album starts off, is with the sense that, in the unlikely event of this fantastic voyage, is that we may never get old and everything could be destroyed. There's also, I think, a line about learning to live with somebody's depression. And it was the first time, certainly chronologically, that I can recall hearing a singer talk about depression in such a way. Because certainly until relatively recently, mental health was something that was never really discussed in popular culture. The idea of, well, if somebody's mad, well, they wear a white suit and they're stuck into a funny farm, is what they call them, with a padded cell, and they draw with crayons. And there was never an understanding of what depression was or how it worked. The assumption was always, well, if you were depressed, you were mad, and that your brain had broken, and you were not fit or capable of being part of everyday life. Whereas the lyric in Fantastic Voyage about learning to live with somebody's depression, which is a theme which David Bowie had in the songs of the Uli Brothers, he later returned to it on Jump They Say, and also the cover of the Metropolis, the photograph or the cartoon of the Croydon hospital, which I used to work near, and I used to walk past that without knowing the meaning and importance that it had to anybody, is that you would live with that. And somehow, the idea of depression and mental health illnesses almost being like an invisible illness, a monster, which nobody else could see apart from you. You could only see it in the way that like a black hole can be seen, but there's an absence of light around there that's sucking all the light in. And depression never turns up and it shakes your hand and goes, "Hi, I'm depression, and you've got me now for a while." Never does that. Never does that. It sneaks in insidiously and quietly, like carbon monoxide or something. It's something that slowly kills you, and you don't even know it's there. Like drinking a poison that's colourless and flavourless, except it's inside your head, and you can't escape from your own head. Brain transplants are not, despite what the man with two brains tells you, brain transplants are not an actual thing. So Fantastic Voyage for me is one of the really pivotal songs in David Bowie's career and in his work around kind of exploring and addressing the issue of what it is like to face both your own mortality and serious illness. Learning to live with somebody's depression. And the opening lyric from I think the first single from the album, or maybe the second single from the album, DJ, has a line about being incurably ill. Is living with that. That's a theme that runs through the albums. And David Bowie's brother, I think his name was Tony, was seriously ill and had mental health issues all through his life. And clearly that was something which David revisited a number of times through his work, as I've mentioned before, with Jump They Say, and so on and so forth. Okay, so we are going on to the second track on the album now. Don't worry, it won't take 20 minutes per song, so this means this isn't going to take 400 minutes to do the whole thing, by the way. That would be ridiculous. I mean, many things are ridiculous, but that would be the most ridiculous thing ever, to spend 3 hours talking about a 34-minute album. The second song on the album is African Night Flight. Now, I think the sequencing for Lodger is unbalanced. I would sequence the album differently. And if I was sequencing the album, it would open with Fantastic Voyage. Then it would have Look Back in Anger, Boys Keep Swinging, DJ, and then it would follow African Night Flight, Move On, Yassassin, Red Sails, Repetition, and Red Money. And of course, having those three songs at the end, all starting with RE, is probably not unintentional, in my opinion. But the second track on the album is African Night Flight, which is, I think it's fair to say, side one of the album is around travel and being displaced and moving from one place to another and not feeling like you belong in the world in which you're in. And African Night Flight is, I mean, I listened to it again a number of times today and yesterday, and I tried to latch onto the lyric to find something of meaning. It's really difficult. It's mostly gibberish. Sorry, guys, it is. But sometimes David would record lyrics with the idea of the phonetic truthiness of it as opposed to anything else. And so in some respects it's held together by the vocal. The instrumental backing is, you wouldn't be listening to that and go, that's conventional Western musicians using Western scalings or anything like that. Now, it was inspired by a trip that David made to Kenya in 1978 with his son, and some of the people that he met when he was there. So, for example, some of the people that he met when he was there included German pilots who'd been there in the Second World War and hadn't really come back. They'd kind of stayed out there. Now, my grandfather, who died probably 25, 30 years ago now, did serve in the desert in the Second World War, much like these German fighter pilots. And you could tell when you were talking with him that a part of him was stuck forever in the desert in May 1942, where it's absurdly warm and it's like 120 degrees, and you don't come back, you're not changed. So, for example, he would sit in the living room, he would wear two jumpers, the heating would always be on, and it would still be about 30, 35 outside. So it would be like a hot, boiling summer's day, and it still wouldn't be hot enough because he got so used to being over there for an extended period of time. And sometimes people, when they go somewhere, I went down to London for work in the year 2000, thought I might be a couple of years and then I'd come back with a jump in my career, and maybe I would have met somebody and I'd live in Birmingham. No, I've been down south now for 22 years and I'm not coming back. In fact, much like the American soldiers in Apocalypse Now, which was also released in 1979, the ones that said, sell the wife, sell the cows, I'm never coming back. That was pretty much the kind of people that David was talking to when he was on holiday. It inspired African Night Flight. Also inspired, I think, Move On. Move On, again, a song about moving on and changing where you are in your environment that you're living in. Now, he also said that if you, one of the things that he did is he revisited old tapes, old instrumental songs that he had recorded with the idea of going, can I do something with these? And maybe I couldn't be inspired enough to write a vocal line when I recorded them. Move On is, according to what David said, is all the young dudes played backwards, but then played by musicians. So, for example, they listened to all the young dudes backwards, and then they tried to play the backwards version of all the young dudes and play it forwards. Now, I reversed the MP3 of Move On. I played it backwards. I reversed it, the backwards version, and the intro is, you could see that it could be all the young dudes, but after that it all falls apart pretty quickly and becomes its own thing. It's not the most amazing song in his career, but it's a good one, and a good one by his standards is better than the entire of some bands' careers. Yes, I'm looking at you, Shed 7. I'm never going to miss an excuse to give you guys a kicking because I don't think you're very good. Track 4 is Yassassin, which is Turkish for long life, and allegedly was inspired by the fact that David Bowie's neighbours, when he was living in Berlin, were Turkish. The music that they would listen to, and he would hear their music coming through the walls, and the experiences that they had, again, living somewhere where they didn't necessarily belong. These were things which were on his mind when he was recording these songs. And then track 5, side 1, track 5, end of side 1, is Red Sails, which I have very little to say about Red Sails. So you move the album over, side 2, and side 2 of Lodger, let's put it that way, there you go, that's side 2 of Lodger. It isn't actually, that's a gatefold sleeve. Let's open the sleeve and take the inner sleeve out, and you can see that there's a lyric sheet here and a black and white photograph. which has got both the lyrics in, which is good because I can kind of almost make sense of them sometimes. And as I mentioned before, if I remember this lyric sheet would have been here, I definitely would have quoted Fantastic Voyage earlier, which opens with, "In the event that this fantastic voyage should turn to erosion and we never get old, remember it's true, dignity is valuable and our lives are valuable too. We're learning to live with somebody's depression, and I don't want to live with somebody's depression. We'll get by, I suppose." And then there's a line about, "That's no reason to shoot some of those missiles. Think of us as fatherless scum." And you know, and then there's "But any sudden movement, and I've got to write it down, they wipe out an entire race, and I'm still getting educated, and it won't be forgotten because I'll never say anything nice." And you kind of go, that's about the apocalypse, isn't it? That's about nuclear destruction and the end of the world. And the other songs all kind of have that shadow of apocalypse over them, which is fascinating to hear. But we go over to side two. So let's go over to side two. By the way, if you're a record collector scum, yes, I am. Apparently the Bowie orange labels are better than the green ones. The green ones being after the fact international export versions, the orange ones being the original releases. I don't quite know how or why I know that, but I do now. But side two of the album opens with DJ, and then DJ is an interesting song. It has the opening lyric around, "I'm home, lost my job, and incurably ill." And it's interesting because, like the other songs on side two of the album, they are around society and living in society and existing in society, and things like, you know, jobs and passions and sex and power and money, and basically all the lyrics to the Pet Shop Boys Palinero, by the way. But also, it's around a human being reduced to work. You know, DJ. I am a DJ. I am what I play. And I don't think there's any coincidence that the initials DJ are the same as David's birth identity, David Jones. And it's almost like a callous response to the disco kind of craze, which was a big deal. I Feel Love and all that type of stuff was ongoing at that point. And well, there you have it. That's DJ, which was the second single that was released from the album, and I a very good single too as well, I think. In fact, I should probably bring out to you the second single now to prove to you that yes, I do have DJ on 7-inch single with the cover taken, I think, from the video shoot. It's backed with Repetition. I was always disappointed by David Bowie's B-sides because they generally were almost always album tracks, even though he had tons of stuff he didn't release. He could have released 2 or 3 songs from every album, which he chose not to, and instead put LP tracks on the back. But then people weren't necessarily thinking about a single as being a complete artistic statement. You try and track down every single David Bowie 7-inch or every single variation. There's gazillions of them. They just pick out any old song and stick it on the B-side because you had to have a B-side. But DJ was the second single from the album. Didn't sell particularly well. I think the week it came out was also the week that Gary Numan's Our Friends Electric became absolutely huge. And if you look at the video for Our Friends Electric, it looks just like the photographs on the inside gatefold of the stage album by David Bowie. You know, a guy in a black leather jacket surrounded by what looks like lots of industrial cables and you know, scaffolding and things, singing songs about urban alienation, largely made by computers. And you could be easily forgiven for thinking, could be David Bowie there, but it isn't. It's better than Gary Numan because, yeah, everyone's talking about David Bowie these days. Well, I am anyway. So DJ is, I think, a great song. And track 7, side 2, track 2, Look Back in Anger. Oh man, this is one of my very favourite David Bowie songs, Look Back in Anger. Very, very underrated as well, I think. It's got this wonderful kind of construction and this idea, and you listen to it, it's kind of like music that's played by people that have been told what to play, if that makes sense. You kind of think, when you read a review of a band and you don't know what the band sounds like, certainly in the 90s that was a big deal. That was actually, you can find any old band by looking on YouTube or whatever, or any old musical artist. But you listen to something and you read, you know, the description, and it was something like, you know, by like the sound of angels being kissed by God during a thunderstorm or something, and you sit there going, I have no idea what that sounds like. And maybe something like Look Back in Anger would maybe be a description that came out of something like the Melody Maker or NME. And then someone's going, now you need to make a song that reads like that sentence. And I think Look Back in Anger is a song that, like Fantastic Voyage and like another number of other songs on the album, actually is obsessed with and directly addresses death and mortality. You know, the opening lyric here is, "You know who I am," he said. "The speaker was an angel. He coughed and shook his crumpled wings, closed his eyes and moved his lips. It's time we should be going." Which always reminds me of that fabulously heartbreaking tweet from Terry Pratchett, which is, you know, "Death appeared. Come, Terry, it is time." You know, that moment where suddenly you meet the angel of death, and he tells you that, you know, you must keep your appointment with the Wicker Man, as the old film said. It's a song about, in some respects, it feels like, you know, when all your life flashes before your eyes at the moment where perhaps you die. Obviously, I've not died. I don't know what that's like. I have been present when people have died. That's fucking heavy, and yeah, I wouldn't wish that on anybody. But it's that moment where you suddenly kind of think, "Oh God, yeah, that's it. I'm going. This is the end of it." And then there's that kind of like addressing who that is. So the lyric around this "Look Back in Anger" is kind of like saying, well, this is the moment where you look back on your life and you go, could I have been a better person? Could I have done more things? Could I have been more considerate? What could I have been? How could I have been? And it's a really strange lyric because it doesn't have a conventional meter. It doesn't have a conventional rhythm. There's no rhyming structure inside that. But of course, the good thing is, fabulous lyrics. You don't even notice there's not a rhyming structure. This is not like around, you know, done it with a doctor in a helicopter, feelings in a supersonic, give me gin and tonic. You know, that's a very, very primitive rhyming structure, A, A, B, B. With this, it's, you know, you kind of look at it and go, well, is it A, B, C, D, F, 1, 2, A? I don't know. Something like that. And the lyrics that we've got for Look Back in Anger, there's also that line about, you know, I've been waiting so long. I've been waiting so long. Look back in anger, and the idea being is that, to me at least, it feels like someone that's starting to address their mortality in the same way that it is in Fantastic Voyage. Almost like, you know, the unconscious thought of somebody's last words. And then also the lyrics to Look Back in Anger could be seen almost as the flip side of The Man Who Sold the World. The idea about, he gazed a gazeless stare, and we met upon the stairs, and we talked of wheres and whens. And there's a lyric around here is that, you know, no one seemed to hear him, so he leafed through a magazine, and yawning rubbed the sleep away, and very sane he seemed to me. It's almost like the person that the narrator of The Man Who Sold the World is singing about is actually writing a song back about his experience of the same events. There's a very interesting, I genuinely mean this, it is interesting. There's two films, Letters from Iwo Jima and Flags of Our Fathers, which is a film around a conflict and a battle in the Second World War, but told from the two sides of the opposing armies. So one's told from the point of view of the Japanese, and the other one is told from the view of the American soldiers that were fighting in Iwo Jima. And the idea being is that actually it's two sides of the same story, and perhaps with The Man Who Sold the World and with Look Back in Anger, you've got two songs that are written about the same event from two different people. This also follows up, by the way, with A Good Heart by Fergal Sharkey, and a follow-up single, You Little Thief, since both the people that were involved in that relationship were songwriters, and they both wrote the lyrics, and you can kind of read one as the response to the other, or vice versa. Fascinating. God, I love pop music. It's amazing. I was lost in this world before I had pop music. And of course, track 8, which I need to talk about, is the first single from the album Boys Keep Swinging, ripped off by Blur on their single MOR, and also, you know, influential elsewhere. Boys Keep Swinging has drums by Carlos Alomar, bass by Dennis Davis, and guitars by Bowie and Adrian Belew. And so that's an interesting song. Boys Keep Swinging, which is the first single from the album. Here's the 7-inch single, boys and girls, backed with the wonderful Fantastic Voyage. This copy, like many of my 7-inch singles, belonged to Susan Dawson. of number 85, by the way, who's written her name on the sleeve there. Hi, Susan. Thank you for having such great taste 42 years ago, or 43 years ago. But Boys Keep Swinging, to me, is kind of it's almost like David Bowie does the Village People, which is a bizarre idea, but it's a YMCA style song around what it's like to be young. For example, the lyric around, heaven loves you, the clouds part for you, nothing stands in your way when you're a boy. Clothes always fit you, life is a pop of the cherry when you're a boy. Young man, you can go to town and do all your favourite things. There's no need to be unhappy down at the YMCA. The idea is when you're a boy, you can wear a uniform, and when you're a boy, other boys check you out. You get a girl. These are your favourite things when you're a boy. It's all almost like a child's idea of what being a grown-up would be like, is that you can wear a uniform, you can go to town, you can meet a girl, you can buy a home of your own, you can learn to drive and everything. You'll get your share when you're a boy. Fascinating lyrical conceit, and a very astute kind of, riposte or answer to something like YMCA. I don't know when YMCA came out. I'm guessing before May 1979. But also with the lyric and the vocal, is that Boys Keep Swinging is designed to confound you, because you listen to it and you go, the structure of this doesn't really work. Now, apparently some of the chord progressions are exactly the same as Fantastic Voyage as well, which is interesting, and Bowie, the Eternal Magpie, always kind of copied that. But it's a fabulous single, very underrated, and the video bends all the genders, which I think is a wonderful thing to do. And then we've got track 9, which is Repetition. In some respects, Repetition is seen as a response to a Lou Reed song. So it's about domestic violence and abuse. Johnny is a man and he's bigger than you, but his overheads are high. He looks straight through you when you ask him how the kids are. He'll get home around 7 because the Chevy's real old, and he could have married Anne with the blue silk blouse. And then Johnny is a man and he's bigger than her. I guess the bruises won't show if she wears long sleeves. And I'm like, that's a cold lyric. I mean, it's not misogynist lyric in the way in which, for example, some of AC/DC songs are, or perhaps some of the Rolling Stones songs are, where clearly, they're almost callous in their treatment of other human beings. But it's a dispassionate view of domestic violence and abuse. And of course, with the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial, that is something which is on a lot of people's minds lately. And then finally, the last song on the album, track 10, Red Money. Red Money is again a sequel or a continuation of a previous David Bowie song. So it's the same music, the same backing music and performance as Iggy Pop's Sister Midnight from the Idiot and Lust for Life era, but with a new David Bowie vocal on top of it. So when I was saying he was listening to his old songs and repurposing it, Red Money is basically Sister Midnight with a different vocal line. Fascinating excuse. You could probably do a mix of the two together. There's almost definitely somebody on YouTube that has already done that. But the interesting thing about that is to an extent, this is bringing down the gates on the Berlin kind of trilogy, because the main lyrical reprise in the whole of the last song on Lodger is Project Cancelled, Tumbling Central, Red Money. It's well, I mean, I my respect for Lodger has gone up on the grounds that when I first got into Bowie, which was about 2000, and I bought a lot of the old albums on vinyl, they were like £2-3 then, and I still kept my record player because I certainly wasn't going to go out and buy all my records again and put them on CD. There's a fascinating experience, actually, because so if you think, Mark spent a fortune buying all this vinyl recently, all these old records. Now, I bought them when they were old, just not quite as old as they are today, before the vinyl revival came back. So I was buying 10 Bowie LPs for like £5 on eBay, and getting a wodge of records. This one was one of those which I bought at the time. So that brings Lodger to a close. This video is longer than the album Lodger. That's not a surprise, is it? And we have talked about the singles, but there's 3 singles we haven't talked about. I did mention this in a previous episode. Alabama Song, recorded in a break on the tour, June 1978, so before Lodger but released after, and it's backed with the re-recording of Space Oddity from 1979 that was also kind of shown. It's known as the Kenny Everett version. Also, in December 1979, given that there was no tour, there were no, and the album maybe hadn't sold as many copies as perhaps David might have wanted to, he thought about and then released the John I'm Only Dancing remix. So that is the re-recorded version of John I'm Only Dancing from 1975 from the Young Americans album Sigma Sessions, and on this you got Bowie's first ever 12-inch single, John I'm Only Dancing, which features the same core structure as the 1972 not a hit single, but it ditches the verses and changes them completely, keeps the chorus, and has a kind of like funky disco remix kind of approach to it. It's a great song. I wish more people knew John I'm Only Dancing. It deserves to be better known in his catalogue, but it was because of the timing of it, I think it was regarded, and it was officially released as Bowie 4, his fourth single on RCA Records, or under the new catalogue system there, with DJ and Boys Keep Swinging being Bowie 2, and DJ being Bowie 3, and there you have it. There was also, as I mentioned before, the revolutionary song from the soundtrack to the film Just a Gigolo, which was traded on the Bowie connection, but perhaps not amazing, I'm afraid to say. Right, so we have 3 bonus tracks. I've already mentioned John I'm Only Dancing. The other 2 were released on this, the Ryco disc edition of Lodger, released in 1990. These include a new studio track called I Pray Olay, which, and I must admit, it says that I Pray Olay was recorded in 1979. I have nothing to back that up apart from the fact that it says so on the booklet. I don't necessarily believe that, because, for example, Abdul Majid, which I think is on Heroes, takes its name from Bowie's wife, who he met 14 years after he finished recording Heroes, so there's certainly an element of historical revisionism and recording there. It's also backed with a recording of Look Back in Anger, which was made in 1988, which is a fabulous version of the song, completely re-recorded, with the first appearance of Reeves Gabrels, who became, I think, the guy that wrote more songs with David Bowie than anybody else, and also with on bass and drums, another chap called, I think, Erdal Kizaleh, whose name I've never pronounced before right now, as you can probably tell, who was also present at Never Let Me Down during the session of that. And following that, and I've mentioned this before, there was a New Career in a New Town box set that was released in 2016, and this is a fascinating addition to the Lodger story. Disc umpteen of this features the remix, or more correctly, the remastered version of Lodger, remastered by Tony Visconti, and it also features, the lyric insert here, which looks very familiar. The other thing with Lodger is, by the way, the cover art here, as you can see on this picture, is designed to look like a crime photo fit of an accident scene or something, where all the person who doesn't belong in the environment. So sometimes when you look at somebody whose arms and legs are bent like that, and you go, they've broken their ankle. Like when I broke my ankle, I looked at it and I was like, well, that's not right. I guess I've broken my ankle now. That's a thing. And it looked like somebody had replaced my ankle with a football. That's the kind of thing where you look at it and you go, that's not right. Like Sam Rockwell in that film. But what we have with the Lodger cover art is what clearly is meant to be reminiscent of photographs of that famous photograph of the person that committed suicide and they landed on a car and they jumped off the Empire State Building, that type of thing. And we also have here, we have the CD version of the remix of Lodger. So in 2017, the remix of Lodger by Tony Visconti was released, and the remix of Lodger started during downtime in the Black Star sessions. David Bowie listened to, I think, the remixes that Tony had put together from the original multi-tracks of 4 or 5 of the songs from Lodger, and he approved and endorsed those, and Tony finished the job after David's death. And what you've got a slightly different approach here, but you've also got what looks to be, a slightly different an outtake from the photograph here on the gatefold sleeve of the CD. I haven't got the vinyl edition of the remix, because it's only in the box set, and the box set is staggeringly expensive indeed. But there you are. I've got basically CDs are fine, good form of technology to me. They're like vinyl records, but cheaper and smaller, and they don't scratch so easily. So that's a good thing. What I will say is the remix by Tony Visconti, I think, is better than the original because they've got the luxury of time. They aren't laying down the vocals and doing all the mixing and preparation in 1 week, which is what they did in 1979. They've got the ability of time and the passing of time and perspective to rethink how the song and the albums work. So it's been remastered and remixed right from the ground up. So I think there's a different vocal take on Fantastic Voyage. There's a different guitar solo on Boys Keep Swinging. It's not substantially different, and it won't change your view of it. It just sounds a little bit better. The instrumentation is a little clearer. The sound isn't quite so muddy, and the remastering is generally sympathetic. So that is, I'm really surprised by this. I wasn't expecting to spend 45 minutes talking about a 34-minute LP. That is David Bowie's Lodger from 1979. I, of course, was 6 and not paying the slightest bit of attention to any of this. I was more interested in movies with explosions, James Bond, and spaceships, basically. Things called Star Wars and things like Star Wars, like Battlestar Galactica and Star, Star, Star and Battle Beyond the Stars. And basically, it had the word star in it. I was a fan. I'm glad I came to these later on. So, Lodger, thank you very much for your time. And I will see you all again for episode probably 198 or thereabouts. Stay beautiful. Take care of yourselves and each other. And I'll see you all later. Okay, bye. Oh, hang on. I'm just reminded the Iron Maiden B-side, Mission from Harry. The way that they end the Mission from Harry is that they go, some cunt's recording this.